It's hot! The Great Game, historically speaking, refers to a confrontation between the British and Russian empires over Afghanistan in the 19th century. Britain, fearing Russia's expansion across the continent, wanted to prevent an invasion of colonial India. This tension resulted in the First and Second Anglo-Afghan Wars, ending when the border between Afghanistan and Russia had been established. As this tension came to an end, Arthur Conan Doyle began his career as a writer, and probably tied into Watson's character being a soldier in said wars. Ironically enough though, this conflict has next to nothing to do with the BBC's Sherlock episode in question today. I suppose the numerous small wars that occurred during the Great Game are comparable to this episode's cases where people's lives are at stake. I'd like to draw your attention to the Bruce Partington plans as well, one of Sherlock Holmes's shorter adventures, and the first that I've read involving Brother Mycroft. I'll be directly comparing the Death on the Train Tracks segments of this episode with the story in question, whilst critically analysing the rest to see if it is worthy of its acclaimed reputation. Before we crack on, I want to talk to you guys about my Exeter wallet. I'd never heard of a smart wallet before, but they actually exist and are amazing. Should I lose sight of my wallet, I can reliably find it without having an existential crisis and turning all the furniture upside down. I can open up an app on my phone and call my wallet. Just look at this. Even if I call it and it doesn't answer, I can pull up a GPS on my phone too and it'll show me where it is. Even cooler is that it works the other way around too. Say I have my wallet but can't find my phone. Ah, glorious. This is honestly the perfect product for me as I'm a total scatterbrain, but of course it's also just a really well made wallet. You literally push a button and boom, there are all your cards neatly organized for removal. The only downside is that it isn't quite big enough to carry coins, but god, I rarely carry them around these days anyway. You can get 20% off one of these fabulous wallets by clicking my link in the description. Their summer sale ends at the end of July, so grab one of these super duper wallets before the sale ends. Now, without further ado, let's get on with the review. The episode opens with Sherlock giving a prisoner a grammar lesson, triggering the man into confessing his crime despite seeking Sherlock to prove his innocence. It's a rather hilarious opener as I can personally relate to the protagonist's irritation when it comes to illiteracy amidst the common rabble. Sherlock shooting the wall might be seen as a rather hilarious dramatization of his boredom, but unfortunately it didn't play into the story beyond that.
Hey, what have you done to my bloody wall?
Assuming this was John's handgun, I'd have thought this the perfect chance to have him accuse Sherlock of behaving like a child. Perhaps he would need to invest in a safe to store it in. Not that that would stop Sherlock, but I'm also saddened that there weren't any wider repercussions for his actions. I'm not sure how the neighbours on the other side of the wall would feel about being potentially wounded or killed as a result of Sherlock's boredom. Even the severed head found in the fridge served merely as a reminder of how the writers had seemingly forgotten about the whole drugs bust thing from episode 1. Thankfully, the scene was put back on track when they explored the aftermath of John's blogging. Sherlock's lack of knowledge on the solar system is taken straight from A Study in Scarlet. Both the script and Cumberbatch's performance give this moment a sublime quality. Truly, such information about the nature of reality is not important to him, and therefore extends to what information we consume based on our interests. For example, I couldn't care less whether England wins or loses a football match, and by extension, I don't need to know who wins in order to live my life, yet such information was forced upon me by the honking of inconsiderate drivers on the street outside my flat. It's just more of that nerdy empathy I have towards this character that makes him so compelling to watch. Also adapted from A Study in Scarlet is the idea of a brain attic, which Sherlock compares to a hard drive. This concept would be further developed in future episodes like His Last Vow, but this simplified approach to the mind helps the audience further understand Sherlock's unique methodologies and intellect. The next morning, John wakes up in his girlfriend's flat where some half-assed dialogue shows that their relationship is about to be terminated by the writers.
Well, maybe next time I'll let you keep at the end of my bed, you know.
What about the time after that?
So, do you want some breakfast?
Love some.
Yeah, well, you better make it yourself, because I'm going to have a shower.
It fetched over £20 million.
This is in fact the last time we actually see her in the show, and I thought it was a shame the character got pushed under the carpet in such a lazy way. Not that there was much to praise her for anyway. John returns to Baker Street after an explosion from the other side of the road causes the flat windows to break. It's a rather anticlimactic moment that gets the ball rolling on the Bruce Partington segments of the episode. The missile defense program, referred to in this episode as the Bruce Partington program, is an update from a collection of blueprints for a submarine that went missing from the British government. This was updated to digital with a missing USB stick. John rightfully points out that that was a rather silly move, but of course the idea is that you can copy and paste files onto memory sticks instead of having to copy out complicated submarine blueprints by hand like they would have done in 1895. The victim, Andrew West, being renamed from Arthur Cadogan West, is found on the tracks at Battersea Station instead of Aldgate Underground Station. The show focuses more on this idea of a sibling rivalry between Sherlock and Mycroft, whereas in the novel this story is the second time that Mycroft has paid Sherlock a visit ever. The brothers are described as equals as opposed to rivals. Mycroft being a more determined and direct character, described as heavily built and massive with a suggestion of uncouth physical inertia in the figure, as opposed to this tall, slim, sneering, sneaky, condescending bureaucrat. This rivalry is used to essentially put the Bruce Partington case in the background of the episode as Moriarty's bombings take priority in the story. Obviously, it does inevitably become part of the grander mystery, but I think the downplayed importance of the case ties into the fact that Mycroft offers honours to the man who can solve the case, but Sherlock prefers playing the game for the game's sake. Sherlock and John then investigate the gas explosion.
We're from the gas company. Electric. Eh?
I liked how the voice messages left by Moriarty are the Greenwich Pips, which you'll hear sometimes on radio broadcasts. I truly didn't know that they had been marking the start of each hour since before I was born, and I think it's a great indicator of the next case and countdown beginning. This also connected with the 5 Orange Pips case, where a man's family is pursued and killed by members of the Ku Klux Klan. Each member receives an envelope with 5 orange pips stored inside to mark the man for death. It's certainly not one of the most memorable adventures, but if I learned anything from it, it's that Conan Doyle was very good at trying to get you to read his other published Sherlock Holmes stories. The 5 Orange Pips directly references the sign of the 4 and creates quite an in-the-know kind of writing that makes a reader appreciate keeping tabs on all the Sherlock Holmes stories they have read. Likewise, in The Great Game, the pink phone found in the envelope would only make sense to somebody who has watched A Study in Pink. Even more enticing is this idea of John's blogging of such episodes having a mirror-like effect on the audience and characters. The characters in the story can keep up with the adventures, so why can't you? The photograph from the phone indicates 221C Baker Street, the basement flat that understandably nobody wants to rent. The episode quite concisely edited out a conversation exchanged between Sherlock and Mrs. Hudson about unlocking the basement door with this fade to black. I can't tell if this oddly placed fade here was done in the editing suite or was originally mapped out in the script. This moment is also complemented in hilarious fashion by having the men stride downstairs whilst Mrs. Hudson nattered away about the damp. I honestly can't get enough of her as a character, seeing as she has little to no involvement in Holmes's affairs in the novels that I've read thus far. In the basement itself, Sherlock gets the first of many traumatic phone calls from people who have bombs strapped to their chests. Unfortunately, these individuals won't display much significance or character throughout the episode. Why specifically Moriarty targeted them is never made clear, which is interesting as this selection process is normally what leads Sherlock to finding the perpetrator. What compensates for this, however, are the broken and terrified voices speaking through the phones with dictated messages to Sherlock. They honestly go right through me, largely down to the phone call voice effects played over the top of the characters talking even when they are filmed in these uncomfortable close-ups. It displays the lack of respect our antagonist has for these individuals, as their true voice isn't actually coming through here as clearly as our protagonist's voices are. Sherlock then does some glittery research on the shoes at the hospital. I wasn't sure what the purpose of John being ordered to take Sherlock's phone out of his breast pocket for him was, aside from a quick joke about how tightly he has John wrapped around his finger. It certainly wasn't needed, considering we had this staggering retort from Sherlock after John reminded him that a woman's life is at stake.
Try and remember there's a woman who might die.
What for? This hospital's full of people dying, Doctor. Why don't you go and cry by their bedside and see what good it does them?
This idea runs through the episode wonderfully for two reasons. Firstly, it highlights the preconceived notion that Sherlock might be the killer in one of his cases. Secondly, he's solved so many crimes and witnessed so many corpses that he finds emotional attachment to be an objectively negative aspect to his role as a consulting detective. This very dedication to the trade is what makes Moriarty's first appearance as Molly's boyfriend such a stupendously satisfying moment. You do feel bad for her, but simultaneously her desire to impress and be friendly blinds her somewhat to Jim's deliberately obvious gay persona. You get the impression Sherlock's just being homophobic at first, but it's the fact he noticed the phone number sticky note that truly puts the final nail in the coffin of any suspicions surrounding this character. It's partly Molly's inability to observe like Sherlock can, but the way he throws her deficiency in her face makes this moment so delightfully painful to watch. That sounds kind of weird, but it's true. Concluding the scene is Sherlock giving the shoes the full deductive makeover. It's well edited for sure, but I must say I find these reflective glass tubes floating in front of the camera for gloss to be extremely distracting from the details of the conversation. They even use them at one point for another unnecessary transition into the exact same scene, as though more dialogue was mysteriously cut. The Carl Powers mystery stems all the way back into Sherlock's childhood, which I thought was fascinating. We would of course find later on that Moriarty was directly involved with the shoe owner's death, and with Sherlock sticking his nose where it doesn't belong, it gives the pair a long-stemming conflict that has been going on beneath Sherlock's nose for decades. Look, I like Sherlock's nose, okay? Sherlock solving cases and then reporting his solutions on the blog was a really creative means of communication. It keeps Moriarty hidden throughout the episode and uses modern technology to update the protagonist's reliance on the advertisement section of the newspaper in the books. Trouble is, the second victim was stood in the middle of Piccadilly Circus. So you wanted to up the ante a little by putting him in a very crowded location, did you? By having all these sodding people around, somebody is bound to notice him standing there for 8 hours? Especially with the red laser dot flickering on him. I mean, isn't that just a little too much? All the fast cuts and objects whooshing past the camera attempt to obscure how ludicrously unbelievable this second bomb threat was. It's at this point the formula of the episode becomes clear, with Sherlock solving a bunch of quick-fire cases. I imagine this would be what reading The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes after taking an ounce of speed would be like. Hilarious though such a thought exercise would be, it plays into the idea of Sherlock's "there's nothing worse than being bored" characteristic. There seems to be more at stake with Moriarty's game than Mycroft's missing plans. None of these adventures in the episode resemble any of the Sherlock Holmes stories I've read thus far, but they're still interesting and unique. I particularly liked how Sherlock manipulated the wife and the car dealer to extract the information he needed, with an impressive explanation to boot. Though why the lights in the car park went out in time with the score, leaving Lestrade in the dark, I have no idea.
Hey, who turned out the lights?
We then move swiftly on to the old blind woman, whose voice and expressions of horror make her the most memorable victim of the bunch. Assuming that she's having her words delivered directly into her ear, it allows for a super slow, painful delivery of her lines, making it all the more frightening to watch. They rush through another case involving a TV personality killed by her brother's housekeeper. Sherlock got some high quality camera equipment seemingly out of nowhere before claiming John was trying too hard. The best part of the segment though was when the lady was killed before having the chance to describe Moriarty. There was something quite heartbreaking about how somebody at such a notable age would try and be so heroic, not caring that her life would be at risk. Even this very idea is challenged by Sherlock in the following scene.
Don't make people into heroes, John. Heroes don't exist, and if they did, I wouldn't be one of them.
It ties into the conversation the pair find themselves having about Sherlock's lack of compassion, brewing both admiration and aversion towards his rival. The pair then start chasing after the golem, and we have another demonstration of Sherlock's deductive prowess. Oh, I just love how his mind works so quickly that he was already on the Dutch painting worth 30 million quid before the other two blokes could figure out who the victim was. Watson went to investigate the flat the victim room lived in only to find a telescope, the means by which the man was able to identify what was fake about the fake painting. Sherlock, meanwhile, got hold of a security uniform and hilariously gave the curator a warning of the painting's fakery. It got a bit strange and silly though when the pair went down to the homeless network. I truly thought we were going to see some modern adaptation of Sherlock's Arab youths from the book, but apparently they're just there on a stakeout for the golem. In fairness though, it does give context for Sherlock buying the world's most expensive scrap of paper. Annoyingly, the pair are seemingly able to identify the golem from a silhouette who just runs into a car that drives away. Was it just waiting for him there on the off chance he'd be discovered? Anyway, they are somehow able to find the professor that the victim discussed the fakery with, not in her home as you might expect in the middle of the night, but in a planetarium watching a video on the solar system. I'm so confused. She seemed to be looking for Neptune for some reason.
Come on, Neptune.
Before she hears a thud. Now, I think it's fair to assume that being on her own in some building that's probably been closed for a fair amount of hours, she probably isn't expecting company. Instead of showing any sign of fear or disturbance, however, she just carries on watching the show. God almighty. The pair then came to the stage for a wrestle with the golem. It's certainly a visually interesting encounter. The flickering lights make the guy look ominous, not to mention his height. Jesus Christ. There's the disco lighting going on from the projector as well to make this fight looks super cool. The dramatic music seems to play at just the right moments for a hilarious effect as well. The only problem though is hearing the tape being rewound and replayed throughout, as though the professor's corpse is still trying to find Neptune while all the fighting was going on. The case's climax was just as confusing to me as well. Apparently, Sherlock was able to identify a star-going supernova in the painting despite having very little knowledge of astronomy to begin with. He seemed to have figured out the answer simply because he was in the planetarium.
In the planetarium, you heard it too. Oh, that is brilliant. That is gorgeous.
Heard what? That stars go supernova at the end of their lifespan?
The Van Buren supernova.
Not once was this Van Buren supernova mentioned in that scene. All we got was the tape repeating how stars die, and that's it.
Exploded into supernovas.
I think the tense music and the fact Sherlock had little time to begin with seems to distract from the fact that this moment doesn't really make much sense. The Bruce Partington case then became the final job of the day. It was quite weird watching Watson wander around in this episode like Sherlock's apprentice or something with his notepad and pen. I mean, it's not like he's got a lot else to do in the show, has he? Mycroft certainly didn't seem to display a physical urgency to solve the case as much as he does in the book. Instead, he just sends a lot of texts and has toothache. The victim's fiancé recalls exactly what we saw in that strange low frame rate flashback, proclaiming him not to be a traitor to his country. This was certainly the case in the book as he ran away from his fiancée en route to the bloody opera to pursue two blokes that had acquired the plans. For simplicity's sake, the show created a brother character for the fiancé to be the villain, whereas in the novel, one of the people protecting the plans has a brother that steals it for a criminal named Hugo Oberstein. Watson and Holmes go to the recently abandoned Oberstein house, finding a window where a body could be dropped from onto the train tracks when an idle train waits. Ironically enough, Lestrade condemns the pair for breaking and entering, stating, "One of these days you'll go too far, and you'll find yourself and your friend in trouble." That sounds familiar, doesn't it? The most significant change from the book, however, is that Arthur dies from being murdered, Andrew from manslaughter. By the end of reading, you get the impression that West was entirely innocent in the affair and died tragically as a patriot. By the end of this episode, the whole utilization of a USB key kinda flattens any potency the adaptation might have had. Why did Andrew have it in the first place? Even the fiancé's brother's backstory doesn't seem to add up without some significant detail.
I started dealing drugs. I owed people thousands. Serious people.
I thought people dealt drugs to make money, not lose it. Right. Let's clear through the meatiest scene in the episode, shall we? This goddamn scene in the swimming pool is awesome. It's the moment the whole episode had been building up to, and it's absolutely terrific. That opening shot with the ceiling blackened out makes it look really sinister. I've never been to a swimming pool at nighttime, and I imagine it's as deathly quiet as this episode shows it to be. That moment when you prematurely think John is Moriarty was just excellent, as is him opening up the jacket. It might have taken some time for him to learn those lines though, mind you. Then there's the second time we're seeing Moriarty Moriarty in this strangely constructed shot of his face blocked out by something large and out of focus. It really gives the impression of somebody who's totally unhinged. Andrew Scott's chilling performance as well.
Jim Moriarty. Hi.
Man, that guy can act.
Now you're in my way.
Thank you.
Didn't mean it as a compliment.
Yes, you did.
Yeah, okay, I did. But the flirting's over, Sherlock. Daddy's had enough now.
It's how his vocal range peaks and troughs so unexpectedly, just like his outbursts of anger.
Dear Jim, please will you fix it for me to get rid of my lover's nasty sister? Dear Jim, please will you fix it for me to disappear to South America?
Oh, Jesus Christ. The delivery and lines make it feel almost like there's some knowingness hidden away back there, but honestly, I'm clutching at straws now. Anyway, I thought it was so brilliant having John and Sherlock argue earlier about the value of people's lives, not turning people into heroes and all that, and then...
People have died.
That's what people do!
It's almost like Moriarty needed to remind him of that fact, tempting Sherlock back to the dark side in a certain way. And of course, that final twist that leaves the episode on a cliffhanger is top notch. I know it's tiny, but I actually really liked that we don't hear Sherlock shoot. Better to leave the episode wondering if he'll do something rather than knowing that he did. So, did it suck? This one was quite the tricky episode to get my head around for a long time. I've always remembered enjoying it profusely, but after taking a good long look at it, I'd say it's still an enjoyable episode, yet not as perfect as I remember. Everything that makes this show great is present here. The acting, the humour, and a respect for the original stories is definitely present. Some of the modern adaptations work a treat, other aspects not so much. The absolute highlights of this episode are, first of all, the hostage phone calls, and secondly, the climatic scene in the swimming pool at the end. They clearly had a lot of talented editors working overtime on these episodes, but there are moments that are real head scratchers in terms of story and flow. Solving crimes in 10 minutes seems like overkill, and some of the lesser adventures just get forgotten about from being undercooked. The best example in my mind was the TV star death malarkey. Otherwise, this episode is a roller coaster ride, finishing with a trip on the world's greatest ghost train to round it off. I give The Great Game a 7 out of 10. Ironically enough, though, this conflict has next to nothing to do with the BBC's Sherlock question in... Here we go. Whilst critically analysing the rest to see if it was really worth... There seems to be more at stake with Moriarty's game than Moriarty's... oh dear. But apparently they're just going down there to look for the golem. That's Gollum, not Golem. It's getting hot in here, so take off all your clothes. Oh, you wish. Sign up to my OnlyFans, boys.